In this video, we're going to be going through setting up the Visual Studio project for our purchase orders and adding the two additional packages, Dapper and Syncfusion. We're going to be using Dapper to link our Visual Studio project, our C# project, with the SQL database, and we're going to be using Syncfusion to provide controls such as drop-down lists, data grids, and similar things. Now, Dapper, I'm going to be following example set out by a chap called Alan Simpson. He's got a series of YouTube videos on how to use Blazor and Dapper. I suggest you watch those if you haven't done already. I'll put a link in the description. Even better, he's created a little program to do most of the hard work of code generation for the basic operations we'll need. I'll put a link in that as well. So let's get started. We'll start by opening Visual Studio. I'm using Visual Studio 2019 Community Edition. It's actually version 16.8.3. Click Create New Project, and we should see a Blazor app. If you don't see it, if you enter C# in this drop-down list here, and then scroll up and down, you should find it. Once you've got it selected, click Next, and we'll give it our project a name. I'm going to call it Blazor Purchase Orders. If you're going to be following along with this project, I put the code in blazorcode.uk website, and if you copy and paste the code from there, you'll probably need to call your project exactly the same. I'm leaving the other items as default and click Create. It's going to be a Blazor server app, and notice that I've got .NET 5.0 selected. We're going to change authentication and we're going to use authentication. So click Change and select individual user accounts and click OK. Then click Create. Now it's tempting at this stage to just run IIS Express to see if the template works. Don't do that because we need to just check the setup for the authentication database. So if you open App Settings, you'll see that the default location or default connection is server local DB, and it's going to create a database called ASP.NET-Blazor purchase orders, and then a dirty great long number that looks like a GUID. First of all, let's change the name of the database. We don't want the numbers after it. And we want to just call it, say, purchase orders auth. This way it'll match our purchase orders database, but simply have auth on the end. And the other thing is that it wants to put it in this database, this SQL server here. Now, if we look at View SQL Server Object Explorer, you'll see that if I look on that database, sorry, that server, look under databases, that's not where we've got the purchase orders database. The purchase order database has ended up, for one reason or another, on this server called desktop ht2ck.hq SQL Express. So that is the name that I want to put in here so that we keep both databases on the same server. So if you right-click Purchase Orders, select Properties, we get the server here. So if you just highlight all that lot and copy it, we can then paste that over that section there, the MSQL local database. And it'll now point to the server where we've got the purchase order database, and the database is now called purchase orders auth. If I save that, we're now going to run something called migrations. This is part of entity framework, and this will create the authentication database for us. So we want to select tools, NuGet package manager, and package manager console. And in the bottom here, we want to type in update hyphen database, and then just press return. And that seems to have worked. Now at this stage, we should be able to run it. So far, so good. And we can go to the standard Blazor items, and they're all there. But notice up here, we've now got register. I'm just going to create a user for myself. So I'm going to click, I'm going to enter an email address, and I'm going to enter a password. The passwords, I think you need an upper and a lowercase letter, a number, and a symbol. So if you try to do it without, you'll get a warning message. That seems to have worked. Now, ordinarily, a user for an application like this would be sent a confirmation email. This hasn't been set up yet, so we can just click to confirm the account, and that's done. Okay, so we can now, I think we can probably log in. Let's try logging in. Yes, yeah, and now you'll see it says hello, and then your login email, and so on. So that's good, fine. The next things we need to do are to add the two packages for Dapper and Syncfusion. So I'm going to close that window and go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and we're going to be looking for Dapper and Syncfusion. So if you click Browse, and if we search for, let's look for Dapper first. And you'll see a great long list of Dapper packages. It's the top one, just Dapper, that we want. Highlight that, click Blazor Purchase Orders, and install. So that's been okay. Let's just unpin that. As well as Dapper, we also need Microsoft Data SQL Client. This is needed by Dapper. You can tell I've been here before. And it's this one, Microsoft Data SQL Client, and we'll install that. Accept the license terms. That's fine. And lastly, we want Syncfusion. and I search for Syncfusion Blazor. It's the top one we want, which is syncfusion.blazor. From I think about version 18.4, it's been possible to download the individual components rather than the whole package. That's to make the WebAssembly uh, applications run faster than they used to. Because we're running it on the server and because we'll be using a limited number of components, I suggest we install the whole thing. So select that, syncfusion.blazor, and install. Accept the license, and that's done. If we now look at installed, let's clear that, and we'll see that we've got Dapper, we've got Microsoft Data SQL Client, and we've got Syncfusion. And just make a note that this is Syncfusion 18.4.0.33. We need to license the Syncfusion, and the easiest way to do that is to open a web browser, and let's just search for Syncfusion and go to the Syncfusion website. I have already got an account with Syncfusion. If not, you'll need to create an account. But once you've created an account, click on your name here and select My Dashboard, Download and Keys, and Get License Key. The platform needs to be Blazor, and this is where we enter that version numbers 18.4.033, and then click Get License Key. Just click on that, and it'll produce a box where you can just copy that into the clipboard for use later. Right, so we'll close that now and go back to our Visual Studio. Now, a couple of things we need to do. Let's close that. We'll close everything in sight. In Startup, sorry, that was me just closing the SQL Server viewer. In Startup, we need to add using Syncfusion Blazor. I've got some of this text ready here to save you the pain of watching me type it all out. So that needs to be added there. In the public void configure, we need to add the licensing line here. So Syncfusion licensing, and this is where you post your Syncfusion license from the website that we've just had, just accessed. And lastly, in here, in the configure services, we need to add this text for Syncfusion support. So that should finish that. Let's save it. On the imports, we want to import the text here saying using Syncfusion Blazor inputs, pop-ups, etc., etc. If you know you're not going to need some of these, such as the calendar, maybe you don't need it, but I think it's probably safest just to have them all there. So we'll save that. And on the pages, in the pages folder, we'll find host, double click that, and in this section at the top in the head, we want to add the link to allow Blazor to use, or Syncfusion rather, to use Bootstrap for CSS style sheets. So save that. And the next stage is to make sure we've got the link for Dapper and SQL correct. And to do this, we need to find we'll need the connection string to the SQL database for purchase orders. So if you select View, SQL Server Object Explorer, and that's the SQL Server. If you right click there and look at Properties and scroll to the top, you'll see the connection string. If you click in there, Control A to highlight it, or Control C to copy it. And what I like to do is just copy that to Notepad, somewhere safe that we can get it back in a second. We can now close that. And we need to go to App Settings once more. So close SQL Server Object Explorer, go to App Settings, and you'll see here we've got default connection, and it's going to the correct, or our server, and the database purchase orders auth. We need to add another line in here. So I'm going to go to the end, put a comma, character return, and what we want to do is create our own connection string linking to the purchase orders database. And we're going to call it SQL DB context. And we're going to replace that text, your connection string here, with our connection string. So I'll copy that from Notepad, pop it in there, make sure it's between the quotes, and that should be fine. I think it's interesting here that we can have as many connection strings as we want. And because the authentication database is using a different connection string, we've made it actually be the same server as we've got our purchase orders database on. But in reality, of course, it doesn't have to be. Maybe in a production environment, you may want the authentication database on a completely different server. Just food for thought, really. Right, we now need a new, I'm constantly saving here. We now need to create a new file called SQL Connection Configuration. And we'll put that in the data folder. So right click data and select add, and it's a new class. And we're going to call it SQL Connection Configuration. And into here, we're going to put this text. So basically declaring a SQL connection configuration. Let's save that. And in startup, we need to add a reference to the this SQL connection configuration. So let's open startup again. And down here, under the services add singleton weather forecast, we can paste that. So declaring a variable SQL connection configuration and going off to find our SQL DB context. If for any reason you change that name on the app app settings, you'll need to make sure it's the same here. Fine, okay. That should be it. So let's save everything and run it. Looks if it's doing what we want. Can I log in? Yes, I can. So that's all working fine. Right, so the next stage will be to set up the Dapper to actually link to the database and set up various things such as the data models, the service, the interfaces, and the actual method of connecting to or the method of getting data from to and from the database. But that's for the next video. Thank you.